The dust-laden wind whipped across Catherine Morgan's gaunt face as she stumbled down the main street of Silver Creek, the hot Arizona sun beating down on her threadbare bonnet. Her vision blurred, darkening at the edges as the ground beneath her feet seemed to tilt and sway. 3 days without food, and here she was, 500 miles from Boston with nothing but 2 pennies and a locket containing her mother's portrait. The year was 1876, and Catherine had come west following the death of her parents, chasing the promise of a teaching position that had evaporated like morning dew under the harsh western sun. The telegram awaiting her arrival had been brief and devastating. Position filled, regrets offered, no other opportunities available. "Excuse me, miss," she managed to whisper to a passing woman. "Is there a place where one might find—" The words died on her lips as the world spun violently around her. Catherine felt her knees buckle, her body suddenly weightless as darkness engulfed her. The last thing she saw before consciousness fled was a pair of concerned blue eyes beneath the brim of a worn cowboy hat. Zachary Hayes had just tied his horse to the hitching post outside the general store when he noticed the slender woman in the faded blue dress swaying dangerously in the middle of the street. Something about her, perhaps the determined set of her shoulders despite her obvious distress, caught his attention. When she collapsed in a heap of skirts and petticoats, he was moving before his mind fully registered what had happened. "Stand back, give her air," Zach commanded, kneeling beside the unconscious woman. The small crowd that had gathered murmured with concern and curiosity. Her face was pale beneath a layer of trail dust, cheekbones too prominent, lips dry and cracked. "Someone fetch Doc Miller," he called out, sliding his arms beneath her slight frame. She weighed almost nothing, and that worried him more than her unconscious state. He'd seen starvation before during the war, recognized its hollow-eyed grasp. "Ain't no need for the doctor," said Mrs. Holloway, the general store owner's wife. "That girl's just hungry. Been watching her pace outside the store for an hour, staring at the bread like it was gold." Zach's jaw tightened. He'd grown up poor on a tenant farm in Tennessee before making his way west, and he knew hunger's bite too well to ignore it in others. "Then I'll buy her some food. Tom," he nodded to the store owner, "prepare a basket while I take her over to the hotel." Mrs. Peterson at the Silver Creek Hotel initially balked at the idea of giving a room to an unconscious woman of unknown character, but $3 quickly overcame her moral reservations. By the time Zach had settled Catherine on the bed, removed her shoes and loosened her collar, Tom Holloway arrived with a basket containing bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a jar of preserves. "Add it to my account," Zach told him, placing the food on the small table by the window. "And tell your wife to send over some broth." When Catherine's eyelids finally fluttered open, she found herself staring at a rough-hewn ceiling. Confusion swept through her as she tried to piece together where she was and how she'd gotten there. The last thing she remembered was the busy street, the dizziness, and then, "Nothing, you're awake." The deep voice startled her. Catherine turned her head to find a man sitting in a chair by her bedside. He was tall, even-seated, with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin. Dark hair curled slightly at his collar, and those blue eyes she vaguely remembered were watching her with a mixture of concern and assessment. "Where am I?" Her voice emerged as a dry croak. "Silver Creek Hotel. You fainted in the street." He leaned forward, offering a glass of water. "Drink slowly." Catherine attempted to sit up, mortification flooding her cheeks with color. "I'm so sorry for the inconvenience, no apologies needed. You were hungry, not drunk." His voice held no judgment, just simple statement of fact. "There's food here when you're ready. Fresh bread, some cheese. Best to start slow." The mention of food made her stomach clench painfully. Catherine couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten anything substantial. Pride warred with necessity as she eyed the basket on the table. I cannot accept charity, sir. It's not charity, it's bread, he interrupted, a hint of stubbornness entering his tone. And my name is Zachary Hayes. Most folks call me Zach. Catherine hesitated, dignity battling with the hollow ache in her belly. Catherine Morgan, she finally offered. I had employment arranged, but upon my arrival, I discovered the position had been filled. Zach nodded, standing to retrieve the basket and placing it beside her on the bed. Eat first, worry later. The first bite of bread nearly brought tears to her eyes. Catherine forced herself to eat slowly, though every instinct screamed at her to devour everything in sight. Zach watched her for a moment before tactfully turning to look out the window, giving her the privacy to eat without scrutiny. You're not from around here, he observed. Boston, she confirmed between careful bites. My parents passed within months of each other. Consumption. The house went to creditors and I had little choice but to seek employment elsewhere. As a teacher, Catherine's eyebrows rose in surprise. Yes, how did you know? A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. You speak like someone who's read a lot of books. And you, Mr. Hayes, are you native to Silver Creek? He shook his head. Tennessee originally, came west after the war. I run cattle about 15 miles north of town. He didn't elaborate on his circumstances, and Catherine didn't press. The West, she was learning, had its own code of privacy. As Catherine's strength returned with each bite of food, she became increasingly aware of her precarious situation. A woman alone in a frontier town, with no money, no job prospects, and no connections. And now she was indebted to this stranger who had quite possibly saved her life. I must find work, she said, setting aside the remains of her meal. I cannot impose on your kindness any longer. You've been conscious for all of 10 minutes, Zach pointed out dryly. Maybe give yourself until morning. I haven't the funds for a hotel room, Catherine admitted, shame coloring her words. It's paid through tomorrow. When she opened her mouth to protest, he raised a hand. Consider it a loan if your pride demands it. Silver Creek's not a bad town, Miss Morgan. There might be work for someone like you. Someone like me, she echoed, unsure if she should be offended. Someone educated, he clarified. Someone who doesn't belong in a saloon or a laundry. The way he said it with such certainty made Catherine wonder what he saw when he looked at her. Not the desperate, half-starved woman she felt like, but something else entirely. Thank you, she said softly. For the bread and everything else, Zach nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. Rest. I'll check on you tomorrow. He placed his hat on his head and paused at the door. Silver Creek's a growing town. It might just have a place for you. After he left, Catherine sank back against the pillows, her mind racing despite her exhaustion. She had never been one to believe in providence or fate, but as she drifted off to sleep with a full stomach for the first time in days, she wondered if perhaps her collapse in the street had been more fortunate than she realized. The following morning, Catherine awoke to sunlight streaming through the thin curtains. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind until the events of the previous day rushed back. Sitting up, she noticed a small package on the bedside table that hadn't been there before: a fresh loaf of bread, an apple, and a folded note. Miss Morgan, it read in a strong if somewhat unpolished hand, speak to Mrs. Peterson about work in town. She knows everyone worth knowing. If you find nothing suitable, the Double H could use a teacher for the ranch children. ZH. Catherine read the note twice, stunned by the offer. Teaching at her ranch wasn't what she had envisioned for herself, but neither was starving in a frontier town. The choice seemed clear when framed that way. After washing her face and doing her best to make herself presentable, Catherine ventured downstairs to find Mrs. Peterson, the hotel proprietress. The older woman eyed her with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Mr. Hayes said I should speak with you about potential employment opportunities, Catherine said, summoning her courage. Did he now? Mrs. Peterson's expression softened slightly. Well, Zach Hayes isn't one for wasting words or time. If he thinks you're worth helping, that counts for something in these parts." She gestured for Catherine to follow her behind the front desk. "What skills do you have, besides book learning?" "I can sew quite well," Catherine offered. "And I've managed household accounts, correspondence. Can you cook?" Mrs. Peterson interrupted. "Basic meals, yes." The older woman nodded thoughtfully. "The Richardson family just lost their housekeeper to matrimony. They have 3 young children and more money than sense since their silver mine started producing. They might take you on, at least temporarily." By midday, Catherine found herself employed as a housekeeper and tutor to the Richardson children. The pay was modest, but included room and board in their grand house at the edge of town. As she arranged her few belongings in the small but clean bedroom, Catherine felt a wave of gratitude toward the cowboy, who had quite literally picked her up from the dirt. The Richardson household proved to be chaotic, but not unkind. Margaret Richardson, a nervous woman prone to headaches, was relieved to have help with her energetic children. The children themselves, ages 7, 5, and 3, were wild but eager to learn, especially when Catherine introduced them to her favorite childhood stories. 2 weeks passed without Catherine seeing Zachary Hayes. She thought of him often, wondering how to properly thank him for his intervention. Her pride prevented her from seeking him out directly, but she found herself scanning the streets whenever she accompanied the children into town. It was on a Saturday morning, while supervising the children at the general store, that she finally encountered him again. Catherine was helping young William Richardson select candy with his weekly allowance when the store's bell jangled, and Zach entered, dusty from the trail. Their eyes met across the crowded space, and Catherine felt an unexpected flutter in her chest as he tipped his hat in greeting. "Miss Morgan," he said, approaching them, "I see you found employment." "Thanks to your recommendation," she replied. "Mr. Hayes, these are the Richardson children, William, Emma, and little George." The children regarded the tall cowboy with wide-eyed fascination. William, always the boldest, spoke first. "Do you have a gun, Mr. William?" Catherine admonished, but Zach merely chuckled. "Yes, but it's not a toy," he told the boy seriously. "It's a tool like your father's mining equipment, used only when necessary." William nodded solemnly, impressed by being addressed as an equal. Emma, the 5-year-old, tugged at Catherine's skirt. "Is this the man who gave you bread when you were hungry?" she asked loudly, with a child's innocent disregard for social niceties. Catherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Yes, Emma. Mr. Hayes was very kind to me when I first arrived in town." Zach's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "How are you finding life with the Richardsons?" "Quite satisfactory," she replied. "The children are a delight to teach." It wasn't the complete truth. The work was exhausting, and Mrs. Richardson's demands often unreasonable, but Catherine was not one to complain about honest employment. "She tells the best stories," Emma announced, "about knights and princesses and faraway places." "Is that so?" Zach's gaze lingered on Catherine's face, making her inexplicably self-conscious. "We should return to the house," Catherine said, gathering the children. "Mrs. Richardson will be expecting us for luncheon." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you again, Mr. Hayes. I never properly expressed my gratitude for your assistance." "No thanks needed." He shifted his weight, uncharacteristically awkward. "I was wondering if you might permit me to call on you, properly, I mean." The request caught Catherine completely off guard. "Call on me." "Sunday after church, perhaps, if the Richardsons can spare you for an hour or two." Catherine was acutely aware of the curious stares from other customers in the store. A single woman receiving a caller was gossip worthy in any small town. That would be acceptable," she found herself saying. "Though I should warn you, my situation is not. That is to say, I have no prospects beyond my current position." Zach's expression remained steady. "I'm just asking for a walk, Miss Morgan, not a mortgage." His dry humor startled a laugh from her. "Then yes, Mr. Hayes, Sunday after church. That evening, as Catherine helped Emma prepare for bed, the little girl asked a question that caught her by surprise. "Are you going to marry the cowboy man?" Catherine nearly dropped the hairbrush. "What? No, Emma. Mr. Hayes is simply being polite." Emma looked unconvinced. "But he gave you bread when you were hungry. That's what people do when they love someone. They take care of them." Out of the mouths of babes, Catherine thought, touched by the child's simplistic but profound understanding of kindness. It was an act of Christian charity, nothing more. "He looked at you the way Papa looks at Mama," Emma persisted, climbing into bed, all soft-eyed. Catherine tucked the blankets around the little girl, her mind spinning with thoughts she had no business entertaining. "That's enough fanciful thinking for one night, young lady. Sleep well." But as she retired to her own small room, Emma's words echoed in her mind. Catherine had not come west looking for marriage or romance. After watching her mother wither away caring for her ill father, she had determined to make her own way in the world, beholden to no one. And yet, there was something about Zachary Hayes that intrigued her: his quiet strength, his lack of pretension, the kindness he'd shown without expectation of return. Sunday arrived with clear skies and a cool breeze that hinted at the approaching autumn. Catherine sat with the Richardson family in church, conscious of Zach's presence several pews behind them. She had worn her best dress, a navy blue cotton with white trim that she'd carefully mended and pressed. It was still shabby compared to Mrs. Richardson's silk finery, but it was clean and respectable. After the service, as congregants gathered on the church steps, Catherine felt a now familiar flutter when Zach approached. He had cleaned up considerably, wearing a pressed shirt and his least worn trousers. His dark hair was still damp from combing. "Miss Morgan," he greeted her, hat in hand. "You look lovely today." "Thank you, Mr. Hayes." Catherine was grateful that Mrs. Richardson had already departed with the children, sparing her the woman's raised eyebrows and knowing looks. They walked slowly down the main street, maintaining a proper distance between them. Catherine was intensely aware of the curious glances from townspeople, but Zach seemed oblivious to the attention. "How is ranch life?" she asked, searching for a safe topic. "Busy. We're preparing for winter, making sure the herd is healthy before the snow comes." He guided her toward a small park at the edge of town. "The Double H isn't the biggest spread in the territory, but it's mine. Paid for free and clear last spring." The pride in his voice was unmistakable. Catherine realized she knew very little about this man who had helped her so significantly. "You built it yourself?" Zach nodded. "Started with 20 head of longhorns and a run-down cabin. Now I've got 200 head in a proper house. Nothing fancy, but solid." "That's quite an accomplishment," Catherine said sincerely, "especially for someone who came here with nothing." "I had something," he corrected her. "I had 2 good hands and the stubbornness not to quit." He glanced at her with a hint of a smile. "Seems to me you've got plenty of that stubbornness yourself." "I prefer to call it determination," Catherine replied, returning his smile. They found a bench beneath a cottonwood tree, its leaves just beginning to turn golden. For a moment they sat in comfortable silence, watching a pair of children playing with a hoop nearby. "You miss Boston?" Zach asked eventually. Catherine considered the question carefully. "I miss certain aspects, the libraries, the concerts, the predictability of city life." She smoothed her skirt absently. "But Boston held too many painful memories after my parents died, and there were few opportunities for a woman of my circumstances. And here, you see opportunities here." "I'm beginning to," she admitted. "Though I must confess, when I first arrived and discovered my position had been filled, I thought I'd made a terrible mistake." Zach's expression grew serious. "I'm glad you collapsed where you did, if you'd fainted elsewhere." He didn't finish the thought, but Catherine understood. "The West could be dangerous for a woman alone. Providence, perhaps," she suggested. "Maybe so." He seemed about to say more when the church bell rang out, signaling the hour. "I should get you back. Don't want to give Mrs. Richardson reason to disapprove of your company." As they walked back toward the Richardson house, Zach spoke again. "I meant what I wrote in that note. The Double H could use a teacher. There are 5 families working the ranch with 8 children between them. None of them are getting proper schooling." "That's very kind, but I've accepted a position with the Richardsons," Catherine reminded him. "Of course, just something to consider." They had reached the ornate gate of the Richardson property. Zach stopped, replacing his hat. "Would you permit me to call on you again next Sunday?" Catherine knew she should be more cautious, more reserved, but found herself nodding. "I would like that very much, Mr. Hayes." "Zach," he corrected gently. "My friends call me Zach. Then I shall look forward to next Sunday. Zach." The look he gave her, then warm, appreciative, with something deeper she couldn't quite name, stayed with Catherine long after he'd tipped his hat and departed. As autumn progressed, Catherine's Sundays with Zach became the highlight of her week. They walked, they talked, and gradually she learned his story. He had fought for the Confederacy not out of conviction but conscription, and bore both physical and emotional scars from the conflict. After the war, he drifted west, working as a cowhand until he saved enough to stake his own claim. In turn, she told him of her childhood in Boston, her father's position as a professor before illness claimed his ability to work, and her mother's desperate attempts to maintain their social standing even as poverty closed in around them. "They would have hated it here," she confessed one crisp November afternoon as they watched leaves spiral down from the cottonwoods. "All this open space, the lack of society, but I find I'm growing rather fond of it." "The West grows on you," Zach agreed. "There's a freedom here you can't find back east." Their conversations ranged widely from books they'd read to their views on politics, from childhood memories to hopes for the future. Catherine discovered in Zach a mind far more thoughtful and nuanced than his rough exterior might suggest. He had educated himself through reading whenever possible, borrowing books and newspapers from anyone willing to lend them. The more time they spent together, the more Catherine found herself thinking of him during the week, wondering what he might say about a particularly difficult child, or how he would handle Mrs. Richardson's increasingly unreasonable demands, for those demands had indeed grown. As winter approached, Mrs. Richardson had taken to her bed with nervous exhaustion, leaving Catherine to manage not only the children's education but practically the entire household. Mr. Richardson, consumed with his mining interests, was rarely home. "You look tired," Zach observed on a December Sunday, concern evident in his eyes. "Mrs. Richardson has been unwell," Catherine explained diplomatically. "So you're doing her job as well as your own." It wasn't a question. "For the same pay, I expect," Catherine couldn't deny it. "The children need stability, and I need employment." Zach's jaw tightened, but he said nothing further on the subject. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Christmas is coming," he said, somewhat awkwardly. "I wanted you to have this." "Zach, you shouldn't have. It's nothing extravagant," he assured her. "Just something I thought you might enjoy." Catherine carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a small, leather-bound volume of poetry Tennyson's collected works. She ran her fingers over the embossed cover, deeply touched. "How did you know I love Tennyson? You quoted him once when we were talking about courage. Said something about the will being stronger than fate. 'A well for him whose will is strong, he suffers, but he will not suffer long,'" Catherine recited softly. "You remembered." "I remember most things you say," Zach admitted, a hint of color touching his weathered cheeks. Catherine clutched the book to her chest, strangely moved by this simple gift that showed how carefully he listened to her. "Thank you. I shall treasure it." They walked in silence for several minutes, both aware that something had shifted between them. When they reached the Richardson gate, Zach took her hand, a bold gesture for a public setting. "Catherine," he said, using her given name for the first time. "I'm not a man who speaks easily about feelings, but I think you should know that these Sundays with you have become the most important part of my week." Catherine's heart hammered in her chest. "For me as well," she confessed. "I'd like to court you properly if you're willing." His blue eyes held hers, serious and intent, with the understanding that I'm offering more than just walks after church. The implication was clear he was thinking of a future together. Catherine felt a dizzying mixture of joy and trepidation. She had come to care deeply for Zach, more than she had intended or expected. But marriage was a serious step, especially in a place like this where a wife's life was often one of isolation and hardship. "I need time to think," she said honestly. "Not because I don't care for you, but because this is not a decision to make lightly." Zach nodded, respect evident in his expression. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." The week before Christmas brought heavy snow and tragedy to the Richardson household. George, the 3-year-old, developed a high fever and cough that quickly worsened despite Catherine's best efforts. By the time the doctor arrived, the little boy's breathing was labored and his lips had taken on a bluish tinge. "Pneumonia," Dr. Miller diagnosed grimly. "Keep him warm. Try to get fluids into him when possible." For 3 days and nights, Catherine barely left the child's bedside, applying cool compresses when his fever spiked, spooning broth between his lips during moments of consciousness. Mrs. Richardson, overwhelmed by the crisis, retreated further into hysteria, while Mr. Richardson paced the hallways, helpless and distraught. On the third night, as a blizzard howled outside the windows, Catherine dozed in a chair beside George's bed, waking with a start when she realized the raspy sound of his breathing had stopped. For one horrible moment she thought he was gone, but then she saw the slight rise and fall of his chest, easier now, less labored. His fever had broken. The doctor, making his way through snowdrifts the next morning, confirmed what Catherine already knew. George would recover. The Richardson parents, overcome with relief and gratitude, showered Catherine with praise and promises of a substantial bonus. But as Christmas approached and George grew stronger each day, Catherine found herself increasingly restless. The crisis had clarified something important: life was too precious and too uncertain to waste. She had been hiding in the Richardson household, comfortable in her routine, avoiding the risk of starting anew. On Christmas Eve, after the children were asleep and the house quiet, Catherine sat by her window watching the snow fall and reading from Zach's gift. The poem that caught her eye seemed particularly fitting. "Come into the garden, Maud, for the black bat night has flown. Come into the garden, Maud, I am here at the gate alone." A decision crystallized in her mind. She had been alone long enough. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold. The Richardson family exchanged gifts in the morning, practical items mostly, though Catherine received a surprisingly generous bonus and a new shawl from Mrs. Richardson. She had made small presents for the children: a carved wooden horse for William, a rag doll for Emma, and a picture book for George. In the afternoon, while the family rested, Catherine wrapped herself in her new shawl and walked to the small church for the Christmas service. She had not expected to see Zach there, knowing how difficult travel from the ranch would be in such weather. But as she entered the church, she spotted him in a back pew, his tall frame unmistakable even from behind. Their eyes met as she slipped into a seat, and the smile he gave her warmed her more thoroughly than any fire could have done. Throughout the service, Catherine found her attention divided between the minister's words and the knowledge of Zach's presence. When the congregation dispersed afterward, he made his way to her side. "Merry Christmas, Catherine, Merry Christmas," she replied. "I didn't expect to see you today with the roads as they are." "Wouldn't miss it," he said simply. "Been staying in town since the storm hit." Too dangerous to ride back to the ranch. They walked together through the snow-covered streets, the setting sun turning everything golden and pink. Catherine gathered her courage, knowing what she needed to say. "I've been thinking about your offer," she began. Zach stopped walking, turning to face her. His expression was guarded, as though preparing himself for disappointment. "Little George nearly died last week," Catherine continued. "Pneumonia. For 3 days I wasn't sure he would survive." Concern crossed Zach's features. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Is he recovering?" "Yes, thank God, but it made me realize something important." She took a deep breath. "Life is too uncertain to waste on fear or indecision. I care for you, Zach, very much, and if your offer still stands, I would be honored to accept your courtship." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. "It stands," he assured her, taking her gloved hands in his. "Catherine, you've become everything to me." The sincerity in his voice brought tears to her eyes. "I never expected this when I came west. Never thought I'd find someone who understands me as you do. Seems we both found something we weren't looking for." Mindful of their public setting, Zach restrained himself from the embrace she could see he wanted to give her. Instead, he squeezed her hands gently. "I have something for you." A Christmas gift. From his pocket, he withdrew a small package wrapped in silver paper. Catherine unwrapped it carefully to reveal a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a book, with tiny hinges that allowed it to open. Inside was a miniature compass. "So you always know your way," Zach explained, "no matter where life takes you." Catherine traced the intricate design with her fingertip. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you, may I?" he asked, indicating the brooch. When she nodded, he carefully pinned it to her shawl, his fingers brushing against the wool over her heart. "I have something for you as well," Catherine said, reaching into her pocket, "though it seems insignificant by comparison." Her gift was a hand-knitted scarf in dark blue wool, simple but carefully made during the precious few hours she'd had to herself over the past weeks. "You made this?" Zach asked, wrapping it around his neck with evident pleasure. "Between lessons and household duties," she confirmed. "I wanted you to have something warm for the winter rides." "It's perfect," he assured her, his eyes soft with affection, "just like its maker." They walked a while longer, planning when they might see each other next, discussing Catherine's thoughts about remaining with the Richardsons until spring. As they neared the Richardson house, Zach paused beneath a snow-laden pine tree. "There's something else I've been wanting to do," he said, his voice low. "If you'll permit me." Catherine's heart quickened as she realized his intent. "Yes," she whispered. Zach bent his head and kissed her, gentle and questioning at first, then with growing certainty as she responded. His lips were warm despite the cold air, and Catherine felt herself melting into him, her hands resting lightly against his chest. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Zach rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the day you quoted Tennyson." Catherine laughed softly. "I've been wanting you to since the day you brought me bread when I was hungry." He kissed her once more, briefly but tenderly, before reluctantly stepping back. "I should get you inside before we cause a scandal." "Too late for that, I imagine," Catherine said wryly, noting a curtain twitching in the Richardson house. "But I find I don't much care what people think." Zach grinned. "That's my girl." The following weeks were a whirlwind of change. Once the Richardsons discovered Catherine was being courted by Zachary Hayes, whose reputation as a successful rancher was well established in the community, their attitude toward her shifted from that of employer to almost family. Mrs. Richardson, in particular, seemed delighted at the prospect of playing matchmaker, despite having had nothing to do with the courtship. "You must invite Mr. Hayes for dinner," she insisted one January evening. "It's only proper that we meet the man who's courting our dear Catherine." Catherine, amused by this sudden possessiveness, agreed to extend the invitation. Zach accepted with good grace, though he confessed to Catherine beforehand that he was more comfortable facing a stampeding herd than dining in fine society. "Just be yourself," she assured him. "That's who I care for, not some polished imitation." The dinner went surprisingly well. Mr. Richardson, it turned out, had business interests that aligned with Zach's need to transport cattle to market, and the two men spent much of the evening discussing potential arrangements. Mrs. Richardson, meanwhile, interrogated Zach about his home, his prospects, and his intentions toward Catherine with a directness that would have been scandalous in Boston. "And when do you plan to marry?" she asked bluntly over dessert. Catherine nearly choked on her pudding. "Mrs. Richardson, really, it's a fair question," Zach interrupted calmly. "I'd marry Catherine tomorrow if she'd have me, but we've agreed to a proper courtship first." He met Catherine's eyes across the table, though I hope not too lengthy a one. The warmth in his gaze made Catherine's cheeks flush. "Spring," she heard herself say. "Perhaps in the spring." Mrs. Richardson clapped her hands in delight. "A spring wedding, how lovely, we must begin planning immediately." Later, as Zach prepared to leave, they managed a few moments alone in the foyer. "Spring?" he asked quietly. "Did you mean that?" Catherine nodded, suddenly certain. "If you're still willing." "More than willing," he assured her, squeezing her hand. "Counting the days already." February brought warmer weather and a letter from Boston, a former acquaintance informing Catherine that a teaching position had opened at a prestigious girls' school, should she wish to return east. 5 months earlier, such news would have seemed like salvation. Now, Catherine read the letter with a strange detachment, knowing her path lay elsewhere. "You could go back," Zach said when she showed him the letter during their Sunday walk. "If that's what you want, I wouldn't stand in your way." Catherine studied his face, touched by his willingness to put her happiness above his own. "I have no desire to return to Boston," she said truthfully. "My future is here, with you if you'll have me." The relief in his eyes was answer enough, but he responded by pulling her close and kissing her thoroughly, public propriety forgotten for a moment. As March arrived, bringing the first hints of spring, Catherine gave notice to the Richardsons. They were disappointed but understanding, especially when Catherine offered to help find and train her replacement. The children were less easily consoled, particularly Emma, who had grown deeply attached to Catherine. "Why can't you just marry Mr. Hayes and still live with us?" the little girl demanded tearfully. "Because Mr. Hayes has his own home, sweetheart," Catherine explained gently. "And I'll be his wife, which means I should live there with him, but I promise we'll visit often." Emma remained unconvinced until Zach himself arrived the following Sunday with a special invitation. Would Emma and her brothers like to visit the Double H Ranch to see the new foals? The prospect of baby horses immediately brightened the children's outlook on Catherine's departure. The visit to the ranch proved transformative for Catherine as well. Seeing Zach in his element, confident, respected by his men, gentle with the animals, confirmed everything she had come to believe about his character. And the house, while simple compared to the Richardsons' mansion, was solid and welcoming, with plenty of room for a family to grow. "It needs a woman's touch," Zach admitted as he showed her through the rooms. "But the roof doesn't leak, the stove works well, and there's room for bookshelves in every room if you want them." The thought he had put into accommodating her love of books touched Catherine deeply. "It's perfect," she told him sincerely. "Truly perfect." They were married on the first Saturday in April, with wildflowers blooming across the plains and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of new growth. The ceremony took place in the Silver Creek Church, filled to capacity with townspeople, ranch hands, and the entire Richardson family. Catherine wore a new dress of pale blue silk, a wedding gift from Mrs. Richardson, with Zach's silver book brooch pinned at her collar. Zach, nearly unrecognizable in a new suit, watched her walk down the aisle with an expression of such open adoration that Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. When they exchanged vows, his voice was steady and sure, making promises she knew in her heart he would keep. The celebration afterwards spilled out of the church and into the town square, with music and dancing continuing well into the evening. As twilight fell, Zack led Catherine to his wagon for the journey to their home now. "Happy, Mrs. Hayes?" he asked softly as they left the town behind. "Completely," she assured him, leaning against his shoulder. "Though I can scarcely believe how much has changed since I arrived here. From fainting in the street to this, it seems almost like a dream. If it is, I don't want to wake up." Zack pressed a kiss to her temple. "Do you remember what you said that day in the hotel, when I brought you the bread?" "I said many things, most of them embarrassingly proud given my circumstances," he chuckled. "You said you couldn't accept charity, and I told you it's not charity, it's bread," Catherine finished, smiling at the memory. "You were very direct, still am. And now I have something else that's not charity to offer you." He guided the horses around a bend in the road, and suddenly the Double H Ranch came into view, the house windows glowing with welcoming light. "It's a home, Catherine, and my heart too, if you'll have it." Catherine turned to face him, cupping his cheek in her palm. "I accepted both the day you helped me off the street," she said softly. "I just didn't know it yet." Their first month of marriage was a time of adjustment and discovery. Catherine learned the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings, the constant work, the satisfaction of seeing immediate results from one's labor. Zack, for his part, adjusted to sharing his space and his decisions with a partner whose opinions he valued even when they differed from his own. They established routines: breakfast together before dawn, Zack working with the cattle and hands while Catherine managed the household, evenings spent reading aloud to each other by lamplight. And through it all, they learned each other, both the everyday habits and the deeper dreams and fears that made them who they were. In May, Catherine began teaching the ranch children in a small building Zack and his men had converted into a schoolhouse. It was simple, just desks, a blackboard, and shelves for books, but to Catherine, it represented everything she had come west hoping to find: meaningful work, a community that valued her skills, and the chance to make a difference. "You've brought something special to this place," Zack told her one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the plains in gold and crimson. "Not just to me, but to everyone here. These kids never had a real teacher before." Catherine leaned against him, content in a way she had never imagined possible. "And I never had a real home before, not like this." Zack's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Speaking of home, I was thinking we might add on to the house come fall. Another bedroom or two." Catherine glanced up at him, noting the careful neutrality in his expression. "Planning for the future, Mr. Hayes," a smile tugged at his lips. "Always, Mrs. Hayes, always." As summer bloomed across the plains, bringing long days of sunshine and occasional dramatic thunderstorms, Catherine found herself growing increasingly certain that their family would indeed be expanding sooner rather than later. The telltale signs were there: the morning sickness, the fatigue, the strange cravings for pickles with molasses that had Zack raising his eyebrows but riding into town without complaint. She confirmed her suspicions with a visit to Doc Miller, who pronounced her in excellent health and estimated the baby would arrive in early winter. Catherine waited until that evening to share the news, serving Zack's favorite meal and watching nervously as he ate, wondering how he would react. "Is something wrong?" he finally asked, setting down his fork. "You've barely touched your food and you keep looking at me like I'm growing a second head." Catherine laughed, her nervousness dissolving. "Nothing's wrong, quite the opposite." She reached across the table to take his hand. "Zack, we're going to have a baby. Around Christmas, Dr. Miller thinks." For a moment he simply stared at her, stunned into silence. Then he was out of his chair and around the table, kneeling beside her, his hands gentle on her still flat stomach. "A baby," he repeated, voice filled with wonder. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Catherine asked, though his expression left little doubt. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He looked up at her, eyes suspiciously bright. "Catherine, when I found you that day in town, I thought I was just helping someone in need. I never imagined I was meeting the mother of my child." He kissed her then, pouring all his joy and love into the gesture. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For fainting in just the right spot. For accepting my bread. For being brave enough to start over in a strange place." His hand cupped her cheek tenderly. "For everything." The news of the coming baby spread quickly through the ranch and into town. The Richardson children were particularly excited, with Emma solemnly informing Catherine that she would help with the baby, "since you helped me so much." The ranch hands, rough men unaccustomed to displaying sentiment, nonetheless found excuses to repair anything that might possibly need fixing around the house. As Catherine's body changed with the growing child, Zach's protectiveness increased proportionally. He insisted on hiring additional help for the household chores, limited her teaching hours despite her protests, and took to bringing her wildflowers every evening when he returned from working with the cattle. "You're spoiling me," Catherine chided gently after he presented her with a particularly large bouquet of black-eyed Susans. "Getting plenty of practice for spoiling our child," he replied with a grin. The months passed in a haze of preparation and anticipation. Zach completed the addition to the house well before the first snowfall, creating a nursery adjacent to their bedroom with a large window that would catch the morning sun. Catherine sewed tiny garments and quilts, while the women from neighboring ranches and town contributed handmade gifts and advice in equal measure. December arrived with a blanket of snow and increasing discomfort for Catherine. As her due date approached, she found herself reflecting on how dramatically her life had changed in the span of a single year. "You ever think about what might have happened if you hadn't been in town that day?" she asked Zach one evening as they sat by the fire, his hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. "I try not to," he admitted. "The thought of you alone, hungry." His jaw tightened. Providence was looking out for both of us that day. Catherine covered his hand with her own, feeling the baby shift beneath their joined fingers. "I was thinking about what Emma said all those months ago. Do you remember? When she asked if I was going to marry you because you gave me bread when I was hungry." Zach chuckled. "Smart child." "She said that's what people do when they love someone, they take care of them." Catherine's voice softened. "I didn't understand then what she meant. I thought love was supposed to be dramatic like in novels, but she was right. Real love is in the bread, the simple act of caring for someone's most basic needs." "And here I thought I was being subtle," Zach teased, but his eyes were serious. "I think I fell in love with you that very first day, watching you try to maintain your dignity while eating that bread like it was the finest meal in Boston." Catherine laughed at the memory. "I was so hungry I could barely restrain myself from devouring everything in sight." "I know. That's what made it so endearing." He leaned in to kiss her softly. "You were starving but still saying please and thank you like you were at a society dinner." Their reminiscing was interrupted by a sharp intake of breath from Catherine as a pain gripped her lower back. Zach's expression immediately shifted from tender to concerned. "Catherine, is it time?" she nodded, a mixture of excitement and apprehension flooding through her. "I think so. But the pains are still far apart. There's no need to panic just yet." Naturally, Zach panicked anyway, sending a ranch hand galloping through the snow to fetch Dr. Miller, while he helped Catherine to bed and paced anxiously beside her. By the time the doctor arrived, the contractions were coming regularly, and Catherine's calm facade was beginning to crack under the increasing pain. "First babies often take their time," Dr. Miller assured them both after examining Catherine. "Everything looks normal. Now, Mr." Hayes, I suggest you wait outside while I'm staying, Zach interrupted firmly, taking Catherine's hand. Unless my wife wants me to leave. Catherine squeezed his fingers gratefully. Stay, she whispered. Please. The labor was long and difficult, stretching through the night and into the following day. Zach remained by Catherine's side throughout, wiping her brow, supporting her back during contractions, and murmuring encouragement when her strength flagged. By late afternoon on Christmas Eve, as the short winter day was already fading toward dusk, Catherine's efforts were finally rewarded with the lusty cry of a newborn. A girl, Dr. Miller announced, placing the squalling infant on Catherine's chest. A fine, healthy girl. Catherine stared down at the tiny red face, overwhelmed by a surge of love so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. She's perfect, she whispered, tracing a fingertip along the baby's cheek. Absolutely perfect. Zach's face, when she looked up at him, was transformed by wonder and pride. She looks like you, he said hoarsely. Thank God for that, Catherine laughed weakly. She has your chin. And your lungs, apparently. Indeed, their daughter was making her presence known with remarkable volume for one so small. Dr. Miller chuckled as he completed his work. Strong lungs are a good sign. What will you call her? Catherine looked to Zach, who nodded for her to answer. Margaret, she said softly, after my mother, Margaret Rose Hayes. A beautiful name for a beautiful child, the doctor approved. Born on Christmas Eve, a special birthday indeed. After the doctor departed, leaving instructions for Catherine to rest as much as possible, Zach settled on the bed beside her, his arm around her shoulders as they both gazed at their sleeping daughter. She's the best Christmas gift imaginable, Catherine murmured, exhausted but deeply content. Second best, Zach corrected, pressing a kiss to her temple. You were my first Christmas miracle, fainting at my feet in town. Catherine smiled, remembering that desperate day that now seemed so long ago. Who would have thought that a loaf of bread could lead to all this? I'm glad it was bread and not, say, a side of beef, Zach replied with mock seriousness. Much harder to carry an unconscious woman and a side of beef. Catherine laughed, then winced as the movement pulled at her sore body. You're impossible. And you're incredible. All humor faded from his expression, replaced by deep sincerity. Catherine, watching you bring our daughter into the world today, I've never seen such courage, such strength. I couldn't have done it without you, she said simply. Zach shook his head in disagreement. You could have. That's what amazes me about you. From the moment I met you, even when you were at your lowest point, there was this determination in you, this refusal to be defeated. His voice roughened with emotion. But I'm grateful beyond words that you let me be part of your journey. Catherine felt tears well in her eyes again. Our journey, she corrected gently, and it's only just beginning. As if in agreement, little Margaret stirred in her sleep, one tiny fist escaping from her blanket. Zach carefully tucked it back in, his large hand impossibly gentle against the infant's delicate skin. I love you, he said, looking from their daughter to Catherine. Both of you, more than I ever thought possible. And we love you, Catherine replied, leaning into his embrace. Our provider of bread and hearts. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent in the gathering darkness. But inside the sturdy ranch house, warmth and light surrounded the new family, a family born from a chance encounter, nurtured through kindness, and now bound together by the deepest love Catherine had ever known. 5 years later, Catherine stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching Zach swing 4-year-old Margaret in circles while 2-year-old James tottered after them, demanding his turn. The ranch had prospered under their joint stewardship, growing to include more land, more cattle, and a proper schoolhouse where Catherine now taught 12 children from surrounding ranches. Silver Creek had grown as well, with a railroad spur bringing increased commerce and new settlers. The Richardsons had moved east the previous year, leaving their children in Catherine's care for summers while they traveled in Europe. Emma, now 10, still maintained that she had known all along that Catherine would marry the cowboy man. As Zack set Margaret down and scooped up James for his turn, he caught Catherine's eye and smiled that same warm, steady smile that had first captured her heart. Some things, thankfully, never changed. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Catherine and Zack sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the vast western sky. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against him in the comfortable familiarity of long-established love. "I had a letter from Boston today," Catherine mentioned. "The girls' school again offering me a position as headmistress." Zack's arm tightened slightly around her. "Quite an honor," he said carefully. "Are you tempted?" Catherine turned to look at him, amused by the poorly concealed concern in his expression. "Not in the slightest, but it made me think about how different my life would have been if I'd never come west." "You'd be terrifying young ladies with your high academic standards," Zack suggested, relaxing as he realized she wasn't considering the offer. "Perhaps, but I wouldn't have you, or the children, or this life we've built." She gestured toward the ranch, peaceful in the gathering dusk. "I wouldn't trade this for all the headmistress positions in Boston." Zack kissed her softly, a kiss that still held all the tenderness of their first. "Good thing you fainted when you did, then." "Good thing you were there to catch me," Catherine countered. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the swing creaking gently, before Zack spoke again. "You know, I still have that scarf you gave me that first Christmas. The blue one. It must be falling apart by now." "Not quite, I'm careful with it." His voice took on a reflective quality. "Sometimes I think about how close we came to never meeting. If I'd been a day later coming into town, or if you'd collapsed somewhere else." "But you weren't, and I didn't," Catherine reminded him. "And here we are." "Here we are," Zack agreed, his gaze sweeping over their home, their land, their life together. "From bread to babies to building a ranch. Not bad for a starving teacher and a stubborn cowboy," Catherine laughed softly. "Not bad at all." She nestled closer against him as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "In fact, I'd say it's just about perfect." And as Zack's arms tightened around her, Catherine knew with absolute certainty that the journey that had begun with hunger and desperation had led her exactly where she was meant to be, home, in the heart of the West, with the man who had offered her not just bread when she was starving, but a lifetime of love neither of them had expected to find.